Hi. Today we're going to see how cardiac development would explain the cardiac origins. The heart develops from two tubes, tube 1 and tube 2. They merge together, forming this simple tube. Notice here that even in this early stage, you have an organized blood flow. Blood flow enters here at the bottom, travels the tube, and exits there at top. Let's take a look at this model. Tube 1, tube 2. They merge together and you form this single tube. Now this single tube has a top part, a middle part, and a lower part. Blood flow will enter here at the bottom and then exit there at top. One will see this single tube diagram books just like this. This one on top would be called your bulbus cordis. The bulbus cordis would include the truncus arteriosus, which will then develop later on to the pulmonic artery, pulmonary artery, and the aorta. Here you have the primitive left ventricle, and at the most bottom here would be the atrium. Now, after forming the single tube, the next thing the heart needs to do is to loop itself towards the right, called dextral looping, bringing your outflow tract and inflow tract together in a process called convergence. So, single tube will loop to the right. Let's see how this would look like in our model. Here we go, loop towards right, and we have this configuration. Okay, now we see here that this is the right ventricle, the left ventricle, and let's just draw the sulcus which divides the two, or the future interventricular septum. So here it is. Now we have drawn the interventricular septum. Let's try to trace a blood flow. Blood flow enters the right atrium, right ventricle, exits, goes to the lungs, returns by the pulmonary vein, left atrium, left ventricle, and then where to? So the left ventricle must find an outflow tract. And this left ventricular outflow tract will be derived from a structure from which the pulmonary trunk also develops. And this is called the truncus arteriosus. Okay? Again, this is the bulbus cordis we saw earlier. The bulbus cordis has a proximal portion, the right ventricle, and the more distal portion is the truncus arteriosus. The truncus arteriosus must then partition itself and form the pulmonary trunk here to allow blood from the right ventricle to go to the lungs. The other portion of the truncus arteriosus would be the aortic root. Okay, so that there will be passage of blood from the left ventricle to the aorta. So blood enters the atrium, right ventricle, pulmonary artery or trunk, goes to the lungs, goes back to the pulmonary veins, left atrium, left ventricle, and then the aorta. So let's take a closer look at that. Okay, so this is the truncus arteriosus then. An anterior portion forming the pulmonary trunk or the pulmonary artery, and more posterior portion, the aortic root and ascending aorta. So if we have an unequal partitioning, okay, an equal partitioning of the pulmonary artery and the aorta, one will have pulmonic stenosis. If you have pulmonic stenosis here, a small pulmonary artery, the corresponding aorta will be bigger and may drain both the right ventricle and the left ventricle. Pulmonic stenosis and an overriding aorta draining both the RV and the LV are two of the characteristics, okay, of the tetralogy of Fallot. Other criteria, okay, other characteristics of TOF would be to have pulmonic stenosis. Your RV now has a bigger job, which is to pump blood across that stenotic portion. So that's the third characteristic of TOF, which is RV hypertrophy. To complete the four characteristics of TOF, we have VSD, or an abnormal septum dividing the RV and the LV. Another potential abnormality involving the truncus arteriosus is when you have both the pulmonary artery and the aorta, okay, which comes off from the RV only. So you're going to have an RV which has two outflow tracts, the pulmonary artery and the aorta. And that's what we call the double outlet right ventricle. DORV, double outlet right ventricle. Okay, another third example involving the truncus arteriosus would be when you have a switching of the aorta and the pulmonary artery. If these two great vessels are switched in position, it's what you call transposition of the great arteries. Okay? So, you see, just realizing that the truncus arteriosus is the single structure which develops into the aortic root and the pulmonary artery will make us understand the abnormalities that can happen. Now moving on to the cardiac borders. Right cardiac border is formed by the right atrium. Anterior cardiac border would be formed by the RV here. Left inferior cardiac border is the LV, and when you take a look at the lateral chest X-ray, the most posterior cardiac chamber would be this one, the left atrium. This is again the left atrium, the most posterior cardiac chamber, forming the posterior superior structure on the lateral radiograph. Posterior inferior margin of the heart on the lateral radiograph would be formed by your left ventricle. Okay, now let's see some important things about the left atrium, which is again the most posterior cardiac chamber. Let's unfold the heart here, and we now see the atrium. So we have here the right atrium, this one is the left atrium. You can imagine here that since this is the right atrium forming the right cardiac border, this will be that structure on this X-ray. Okay? If this left atrium becomes so big, instead of occupying only the midline, this enlarged left atrium can bulge and go there to the right cardiac border. So you can see here that this is the enlarged left atrium, okay, reaching the right cardiac margin, forming the double density sign. So this is a sign of your enlarged left atrium. So aside from the double density sign in the frontal radiograph, here's another important relation of the left atrium. Left atrium is subcarinal in location. So this is the left atrium. It is under the right and left mainstem bronchus. Okay, so let's see what happens when it enlarges. Right atrium, left atrium, right? Okay, focus here on the left atrium. Left atrium. Let's make it big. There. What happened to the left mainstem bronchus? Okay, the left mainstem bronchus is displaced superiorly. The carina is, there's what we call the splaying of the carinal angle. Let's take a look again. This one is the representation of the right mainstem bronchus, left mainstem bronchus, and when you have a big left atrium, you have splaying of the carina. If you take a look at the lateral view, okay, the left mainstem bronchus here becomes posteriorly displaced, okay, because of the enlarged left atrium. Okay, so here, this is the lateral radiograph in which you see the left mainstem bronchus here and the right mainstem bronchus here. The two are splayed apart with the left mainstem bronchus displaced posteriorly, forming two legs of a walking man. Here's the example of a frontal radiograph in which you see splaying of the carina. Okay? Alright, let me just show to you this one. Okay? This is the normal configuration of the right and the left mainstem bronchus in a lateral radiograph in a normal setting. The right mainstem and left mainstem bronchus are superimposed on each other. But when you have enlarged left atrium, the left mainstem bronchus, okay, will then be displaced posteriorly.